Now I know why you have in the directions for the lay leader to get rid of the water glass at the end of the week, because I'm going to have a juicy sermon this morning. The last week's water was back there and it spilled all over everything. Okay. Well, is there anybody who has never heard that little song that's often sung at Thanksgiving? Everybody calls it Over the River and Through the Woods, but it really has a name. Who knows the name of the song? Yeah, it's New England Boys Thanksgiving. And it actually has about 10 verses. Yeah. So most folks who were raised in this culture know that song. I sing it to my 9-year-old, Seth, every time we drive into Lexington to visit his grandmother, because we literally drive over the river and through the woods. So we sing it year-round. We go across the Kentucky River, and then we go through about 30 miles of woods to get there from our farm. We usually change the words a little bit, since we haven't got a horse nor a sleigh, and there usually isn't any white or drifting snow. It's probably a good thing I don't know all the verses, because the very last verse ends with, "Hooray for the pumpkin pie." And Seth, which is very typical for autistic children, has an extremely limited palate. So he wouldn't like the song because he would be grossed out by the idea of pumpkin pie. Seth is also prone to imagining that anything he wills hard enough can happen. And that things that he sees on TV and movies can always be reenacted in real life. If he sees it on a TV, even if it's a cartoon, somehow we can make that happen. This is a challenge at times. He actually thinks that if he says it enough times and with enough conviction, it will happen. And since once in a while we give in and make it happen, he continues to go down that path. But, you know, we can't make everything happen. Sometimes we have to squelch those dreams. For example, he watched Eloise a lot, and he decided one day that we could just go to Paris because Eloise went to Paris. So he said it over and over and over, and even invited his teacher to go with us. But 2 years ago, at Thanksgiving, he watched Charlie Brown's Thanksgiving. And he decided he wanted to serve exactly what Snoopy served at the Thanksgiving dinner. Does anybody remember any of what Snoopy served? Popcorn, pretzels, buttered toast. People are, was that you, Paul? And I think of jelly beans or something like that. We didn't go so far as to give up the turkey and stuffing, but we did let him set the table, put all those things on the table, and everybody's plate included some pretzels and popcorn and jelly beans that year. There's a picture of Seth with his plate outside where the birdhouses are. I thought you might enjoy seeing him and seeing his plate. That's all he ate. He didn't eat anything else. But I imagine that most of us didn't know, growing up and hearing that Thanksgiving song, that it was written by a Unitarian. Is there anybody who knew that? It's actually the poem, not the music, but the poem, which is used for the lyrics, was written by Lydia Marie Child. And she may not be among the most famous Unitarians, but she certainly was an incredible woman, Unitarian leader in her time. Besides being a writer and an abolitionist at a time when even the Unitarian pulpits of the day had not gotten on board with abolitionism. She was also a proponent of women's suffrage early and a leader, and she was also a Unitarian. Now, she sometimes got discouraged with the Unitarian churches, although she continually went back to her Unitarian faith. Sometimes she lost patience. In fact, once she called Unitarianism a mere halfway house, where spiritual travelers find themselves well accommodated for the night, but where they grow weary of spending the day. If along with this song, Over the River, we'll call it Over the River, it's a New England Boys Thanksgiving, we grew up with some idea about how Thanksgiving ought to be, or should be, This holiday might seem like more of a burden than a blessing. Maybe dad or granddad is not there this year to carve the turkey. Sisters and brothers may be estranged or squabbling. And worst of all, probably, is that somebody in the family is Democrat and somebody else is Republican and decides to talk about anything. Some of us have families, I've heard this over and over again from members in the congregations, who will never accept or understand our Unitarian Universalist faith or choices, and who think a lot worse of it than it is a spiritual halfway house. They think it's a cult or a coven or a New Age bunch of wacky people or something like that. So how can we turn what for some people, not Prim obviously, she doesn't have this, and I hope you don't, for some people is Tentsgiving into a day of thanks? Is there anything we can do as individuals to shift the tone? Here are my suggestions. They're drawn from this new school of organizational development that Michael mentioned called appreciative inquiry, and sometimes referred to as AI. Some of the folks here learned about appreciative inquiry some years ago and used it. But everybody sitting here has experienced and is experiencing the benefits of appreciative inquiry because you're in this beautiful building in this place and sharing this space, which was brought about in part through the process of using appreciative inquiry to get people on board, raise the funds, and so forth. And Paul Utz, who, don't come up yet, but who will speak in a few moments, I'm going to share the pulpit with him this morning. We'll tell you a little bit more about that journey. Appreciative inquiry is post-Newtonian, postmodern way of approaching organizational, and community life with questions that enhance relationships and engender hopeful, positive, and innovative outcomes rather than focusing on problems and trying to find solutions. For example, just since I was talking about autism, the conversation has shifted over the past couple of years from why is this happening and what can we do to get rid of it to what are the benefits of people with autism? How can we employ their remarkable gifts in society? How can we enhance what they already have and listen to and watch them? And that's been a shift from what I was calling a deficit discourse. Why is this happening? This is so wrong. How can we eliminate it? And even folks who were diagnosed with autism and are now adults are speaking out and saying, we don't want to talk about autism as the problem. Let's talk about what we can do to make the world better using the many, many people that do have this special gift of autism. Taking deficit discourse and using more of a vocabulary of hope changes the whole conversation and can change the outcomes. So I am talking about communication, how we say, the words we choose, and what we say. So here are my suggestions, which you may not need for Thanksgiving or other holiday gatherings, but you probably will be able to use at some point at some time in your life. Suggestions for getting along using appreciative inquiry. First, stick with what they call asset-based language. All that is what's right, okay, instead of focusing upon what's wrong. Seek the commendable and steer away from judgment. If we could even just do that, just that alone, if you remember that and nothing else, seek the commendable and steer away from judgment. Focus upon what's right rather than what's wrong. If you're surrounded by people who are only ever accustomed to deficit discourse, this may be particularly challenging. They will probably look at you with some concern and wonder what new drug you've discovered to make yourself so happy. Try it anyway. See if the energy in the room or in the conversation doesn't shift even a little bit, even a little bit. 2, so that's 1, asset-based language. 2 is establish a higher ground for the dialogue. What higher ground means in appreciative inquiry is something that everyone feels or can identify with or can agree upon. It's a place where deepest principles and beliefs can be discussed without rancor. As the one practicing appreciative inquiry at Thanksgiving, you can try listening and reframing the questions, always seeking for stories and insights and focusing on matters that transcend disagreements. A good example of how this happens is when there are funerals. And we just heard a little testimony about that today. People put aside the petty things, and I think we've all seen that if we've gone to a funeral memorial service or something of that kind. People put aside the petty things, and what is the higher ground? Honoring this person's memory, okay? Number 3, practice the poetic principle, a big part of appreciative inquiry. The poetic principle says that as a poem can be read and interpreted in innumerable ways, so can relationships, family, and community. The outcome is always open. It's not determined that everybody is going to go out, slamming the door and speed away, squealing their brakes at the end of the day. It includes a spiritually grounded respect for every human being. That's part of the poetic principle. Well, doesn't that sound like something that Unitarian Universalists already endeavor to practice? Our first principle. The inherent, help me, worth and dignity of every person, Hey, this is not easy. It's probably a lot more simple to drink a stiff bourbon so that nothing phases you, or develop a migraine so that you can go home early. What I'm talking about is really a transformed way of interacting with others. People who practice appreciative inquiry in their nonprofits, in their congregations, in their lives, in their work life, in their place of business, find that over time they begin to look at things a different way. A transformed way of experiencing the world. Robert Voyle, an Episcopal priest who brought appreciative inquiry to churches and to congregations, says it requires what he calls a conversion. Now, he's using traditional Christian language, but I think we can identify with this. A conversion where a profound reorientation happens in the way you look at the world, at yourself, and at God, or the holy. David Cooperrider, who first wrote about appreciative inquiry back in the 80s, late 70s, early 80s, this is not what he calls happy talk or sterile happy talk, okay? In other words, it's not a thing where you're just going to go in and keep saying, oh, it's such a beautiful day, or isn't it great that, tomorrow's Black Friday, or something like that. It's not just changing the subject, all right? We have a little saying in our family, and it goes, how about them cats? Actually, a lot of people in Kentucky say it. And if you ever lived in the area of Lexington, Kentucky, you would know that basketball is a religion. So it's kind of establishing higher ground in a way, because everybody agrees that the Wildcats are the center of our lives from, now until the end of the playoffs. Okay? I couldn't believe that you all planned things in March. For 15 years, I've had to live with a congregation who will plan nothing. They will plan nothing during March because there could be basketball playoff games. So when people are discussions getting tense and anxious, especially Daddy will say, my husband, I'm pointing at my daughter now, how about them cats? shifting the subject. That's not what this is, okay? This is something a little more complex and a little more demanding than just changing the subject or being a Pollyanna, okay? So how can you do it? How can you do that without looking like you're just trying to shift everybody away? Well, the one probably most simple thing that you can take with you and remember is ask questions. Ask questions, okay? Rather than make statements, ask questions. And you almost always will shift the mood and the conversation. You'll find that people are initially taken quite by surprise when they're asked appreciative questions. But very quickly, you'll be surprised. A trust and a renewed vigor can come about. Remember what I said, seek the commendable and steer away from judgment. It's challenging, it's difficult, especially when we have these long ingrained habits of thinking and being a certain way. Ask questions that attend to memories, feelings, and imagination, rather than or in addition to analysis or opinion. Simply asking that impossible relative a query about his or her favorite Thanksgiving. What was your favorite Thanksgiving? And then you have to listen. just ask the question and wander off looking for the bourbon. You have to listen, all right? And you will begin to feel different, and they will begin to feel differently, and things may shift. Listen with enthusiasm to their answers. Again, if we've always had a deficit view, this is even more challenging than it sounds. Appreciative inquiry is less a technique than it is a commitment. It's really a radically new way of looking at the world, and it is possible only when we ourselves feel deep appreciation for the gifts that we have been given. So you have to practice gratitude first. Because as we experience true gratitude, we naturally want to give. We naturally want to share. We become able to give our time, our attention, and our goodwill to others out of a deep feeling of abundance and joy. Lydia Marie Child struggled with financial security all her life. She didn't really make any money by writing abolitionist tracts and that sort of thing, feminist tracts. But finally, she amassed a small fortune through her writing because she wrote books like The Frugal Housewife. And she was writing this at the same time that she was also writing an appeal in favor of that class of Americans called Africans. She's really an interesting Unitarian to look into if you have the time. Rather than live lavishly, she donated her money, her fortune, freely and generously to worthy causes. And it was she who said, "The cure for all the ills and wrongs, the cares, the sorrows, and the crimes of humanity all lie in the one word, love." It is the divine vitality that everywhere produces and restores life. She could almost have been teaching appreciative inquiry right there. So hey, it's worth a try, right? It won't hurt to try. At least you will have everyone confused and wondering, which shifts the mood. At best, you will help start a new dialogue. If only for an evening, or an hour, or 10 minutes, or even a few moments that lead to a sense of blessing, renewed trust, and unexpected enrichment. You, I guarantee, will feel better about things. As David Cooperrider states, this is a serious cracking of our intellectual foundations. You and I grew up with, but it is liberating rather than devastating to all save those so invested in their own truth as to be blind and abusive to truth anywhere else. In which case, there is always the bourbon or the migraine. He didn't write that, I'm telling you. Some people it's just not going to work with, all right? Appreciative inquiry encourages us to freely co-create the world we pause to envision. It proposes a world where achieving peace and justice for the human family is more than a good idea or an occasional accident of history. It's a possibility that we, every one of us, can help make real day by day. All right, now I'm going to turn this over to Paul, because Paul Utz, who is a founding, charter member of the congregation, and also has been board president and many other things. He's known to many of you, but if you just come lately, he's been downstairs on Sundays with the the OWL program. Sorry, right. Paul.
Thank you. Thank you, Reverend Cain. Good morning, everybody. As she said, for several months, I have not been up here. I've been downstairs with our middle schoolers, co-teaching actually, the Our Whole Lives program. I'm co-teaching this with Betsy Erbow, who is a sociology professor and also teaches gender studies, so I'm really in good hands. And I can tell you, the middle schoolers are amazing, and they are definitely learning something down there. And as usually happens with these classes, I'm learning something too. It's very rewarding, and I have to tell you that this OWL program is about human sexuality, and it emphasizes love and respect and responsibility in human relationships. It's really a very seven principled curriculum that is taught over a 26-week period, and it's really valuable learning for these children. In fact, I wished that my kids had had the OWL training. They're now 21 and 23 years old. But when we started here in 1998, we had our first public meeting to see if this group was even feasible. They were 5 and 7 years old. By the time they were middle schoolers, we were over in the Catholic Campus Ministry in the Newman Center. This is 6 years later, and we just didn't have the resources and the time to offer this class to them and to a whole group of middle schoolers that we had at that time. But I wish so much that they had been a part of the OWL program. And I can tell you this just from our middle schoolers downstairs, you can see already the foundation of these 7 principles on their learning and how they interpret the world. I mean, their questions and their comments really incorporate those 7 principles. It's quite amazing. So, but we didn't, when my kids were in middle school, we had to focus on our own survival. And in fact, we had already been kicked out of one facility because of our commitment to the LBG community. And we were in another facility that we would very soon be kicked out of. Now, the other day we had our service auction here, and I want to say to those that were involved with the service auction, if you were here, you know, it was an amazingly run event. And kudos to everybody who took the time to organize and put that incredible service auction together. It was a wonderful thing. But back in 2000, I guess it was 2006 or so, I got a call on a Friday night at my house that said, you can have your service auction at the Catholic Campus Ministry tomorrow night, but Sunday morning the doors will be locked. We were having a speaker speak about how religious institutions often discriminate against the LBG community. The Knights of Columbus had gotten word of it, and we were told that we basically had 24 hours to get out. Now, I didn't realize it at the time. I mean, we were sort of put into crisis mode, but this was one of the greatest fundraising opportunity and gifts that we could have been handed. I mean, it really, I mean, nobody likes being told what they can and can't do. But I think UUs as a group have sort of an adolescent angst against unfairness. I mean, this was unfair, darn it, and they weren't going to put up with it. And indeed we didn't. I mean, most of you know the rest of the story. We succeeded. And I'm telling you, we succeeded against incredible odds. And with a very small group of people, we raised $500,000, less than 100 people. And then we borrowed another $550,000 from that same group to finish the building because we had no idea how much this place would cost. I mean, we thought it'd be like a house, $250,000 we'd have a building, but $1 million later we realized we were going to run out of money. So we had to borrow another $550,000 from members of the congregation, but at the end of building the building, we went out to the UUA and we borrowed that money to pay these lenders back. Now again, I've been downstairs for the last several months, so I don't know what you've been talking about up here in these last few weeks, but my wife the other day was complaining that leadership had the audacity to ask for money 2 weeks in a row. She said, doesn't that make us sort of like every other church? And, we had already made our pledge. So she's like, why are you still asking for money? And I told her that we are like other churches and that we have to pay for our staff, we have to keep the lights and the heat on. And so in that way, we are like other churches. But from time to time, we have to ask for your time, for your talents, and yes, for your treasure, your money. But there's still some differences from us and other churches. One, we support ourselves. There's no check coming from Rome. And and although we were really helped in our early years by other UU congregations, we pay our own way. Nobody's helping us. And also, compounded with the fact that we're really a very young congregation. I mean, there are congregations in New England that are hundreds of years old. This February, we'll have been officially a UUA member congregation for 15 years. And we didn't start meeting, even the first public meeting was in 1998. So we don't have endowments. Now, Helen and I, we recently did our will, and we remembered this beloved community in our will, but it is our fervent hope that you don't see that money for some time to come. So for many long-established congregations, endowments really underpin their ministry. I mean, they can draw on this anytime the going gets tough. My original UU congregation in Niagara Falls was a very vibrant congregation when I was a kid, But now it's dying, and it's only because of endowments that they survive. In fact, the very loan that we got for this building, that $500,000 that we borrowed from the UUA, was available because a woman at Shelter Rock Congregation left some gas wells to her congregation when she died, and now they're worth millions of dollars. So we do accept gas wells as donations if you have any gas wells. I explained to Helen that this third capital campaign, it's not a routine event. Okay, we're not here to keep the lights on or to pay the salary. We're asking for this third capital campaign so we can support our long-term vision and mission. We're doing this as a community so that the more money we donate during our regular stewardship campaign, we can use to do good works. This capital campaign, like the two before it, they're long-term investments. It's like buying a house. We're purchasing an asset that will ensure not just our survival, but our growth as a community. And when I say growth, I don't mean our growth in numbers, although that will probably occur too, but I mean our growth as individuals, our growth in relationship to each other, and our growth in terms of our relationship with the outer community. I mean, you see this happening already with Family Promise, how it brings people together, and how by doing outreach, that we not only we get more in community with each other and with the community outside here, and it just feels good all the way around. I mean, you feel like your money is doing something. But we have this mortgage yoke around our neck, and we're trying with this third capital campaign to alleviate some of that. Now, I hope some of you newer members aren't put off by the pride expressed by older members about this building. When we had our first capital campaign, I suggested to Helen the amount I wanted to give, and this is back in the early 2000s, and she was shocked at the amount I wanted to give. And not because she didn't agree with the amount, but because her cheap-ass husband, who complained about every small purchase, was willing to part with this, this amount. In fact, she agreed, I think, as much because she agreed with the amount as to see if I'd really go through with it, if I'd really give up the dough. But not only did I do it, but we did it twice. We had two capital campaigns. And I think she's come to realize, and I know I have, that being grateful, that being generous, it not only makes you feel good, it creates a generous spirit that just permeates all aspects of your life. It not only bound us through shared experience with this group, but it enriched our lives as a family and as husband and wife. I mean, it really was a very positive experience to dig deep and give more than we really ever thought that we could afford. And this place is a result of a lot of people doing that very same thing. Now I'm asked to come up here from time to time to ask for money. I have a business, and although I've been told by some that I'm a natural salesman, it's really not true. I could never sell anything I didn't believe in. But in the course of running a business, I have learned a thing or two about sales. And one of the techniques, and if you're a fan of NPR, you've seen this technique used before, is to break it down to the ridiculous. So, for instance, you compare the daily expense of a cup of coffee, and Starbucks has been really good for this because their coffee costs like $4. So if you say, well, for the price of a cup of coffee a day, multiplied by 365 days over the course of the 3 years that our capital campaign runs, you could pony up roughly $4,380. Now, I know most of you get your coffee at Wawa for $1.81. And also, but I also know that sometimes you grab a muffin or a little something else. So you up that daily amount from $1.81 to a little more. So where do we stand with Capital Campaign 3? All right, so far we have 38 pledges, and that totals about $112,000. That's worth applauding. Not bad, huh? So if you break that down over the course of a 3-year pledge, it's $1,000 a year. It basically comes out to $2.74 a day. Breaking it down to the ridiculous. Not bad. $2.74 a day, about the same as that Wawa coffee and a muffin, to feed your mind and your soul. Now, we had our first two capital campaigns. I used a quote in our brochure, an old Chinese proverb, and we've got a lot of mileage out of the quote, is one generation plants the trees and the other gets the shade, to impress that we are building something of lasting value. But the fact is, great-grandchildren, In fact, who knows what future contributions to humanity will be born in this very building? That the young minds that we're influencing downstairs, who knows what they'll contribute to the future for having been exposed to the message and the love and the sense of community that they get here. So it's not just for today, but the fact of the matter is you guys get the shade too, because this place will nourish your mind and soul now. It will provide a place for you at the final days to celebrate your life, and it will inspire future generations because you chose to give $2 or $3 or $10 a day for 3 years for what you value. Another sales technique is to enumerate features and benefits. I mean, you hear this in sales training all the time. So a future might be that here in this place, you make connections with others that help you celebrate life now, to celebrate life's mysteries, and also to provide a place of empathy and comfort in times of duress. That's a feature. Now, the benefit might be that health professionals have found that making connection with other human beings can add about 10 years to your life. And further, by donating your time, talent, and treasure, this is what truly adds, and I know you all know this, to your sense of happiness, which contributes to your health. So that a contribution to the Capital Campaign 3 not only nourishes your health, and therefore your body, but it also nourishes your mind and your soul. I mean, that is the UU Holy Trinity, the mind, body, and soul, right? That's the Trinity right there. So, again, I don't have to tell you this because you're smart people. In fact, there was a study done in 2008 on 2002 SAT scores and how they relate to religion, and many of you already know the statistic, and UU children come up the highest of all religions in UU. In fact, the title of the article was, "Are Unitarian Universalists smarter and Pentecostals stupider?" I swear, that was the title of the article in Discover magazine. You can Google that and look that up. But, you know, except for a few legacy UUs, I'm a legacy UU. I was raised Unitarian. My sister Marcia is, and Karen, where Karen is, she's a legacy UU. But most of you came here because you actually took the time to think about what you believe. So you're smarter than the average bear. Now, and that's somewhat of a disadvantage during fundraising time, because it'd certainly be much easier if I could tell you that if you gave 10% of your income, I could guarantee you a place in the kingdom of heaven for eternity. I mean, really, how many cups of coffee is that worth? So as a denomination, we are smart. But as far as faith communities go, we don't tend to be the most generous. Now, I got to say, this congregation is somewhat of an exception to this rule. I mean, this has been a very generous congregation. And I have to tell you, even during the recession, when many Unitarian Universalists, in fact, many faith communities across the board were experiencing a decrease in their annual pledge, that didn't happen here. This congregation continued, even in a tough time, to increase their pledge. Now, my wife also recently brought home a book. Many of you, I'm sure, have read this. Viktor Frankl's Meaning of Life. It's written by a psychiatrist who spent World War II as a prisoner in a concentration camp. And, you know, he says in Viktor Frankl, in the sort of conclusion, the meaning of life, is we spend a lot of our time, going back in our minds in history and thinking about how we might have done it differently if we could go back in time. And he says, you know, why do that? Why not live your life like you've already done it once and you're looking at it through hindsight? You know, why not try to get it right the first time? Because fundamentally, many of us know in our hearts what the meaning of life is and what really, truly brings happiness to our life. So I want you to picture yourself in your final hours, pondering your life. Perhaps you're riding in an ambulance past this very building. And, you know, what will you see? What will you see as important? You know, what are the things that you think you did right, that brought meaning to your life? What did you do that produced lasting value and will continue to benefit those who come after you? Now, this, quite frankly, is an amazing group of people, and many of you have already contributed to humankind and have done wonderful things for the environment. I mean, it's one of the things I love about this group. It's an amazing group. But as you're taking that ambulance ride past here and your life's flashing before your eyes, you can say, hey, see that? See that building? I helped build that there. And there's children in there right now learning compassion and social justice. It's a place where people meet not just because they share a common belief that informs their values, but it's a place where a group of people with common values gets together to explore their personal belief. And you smile because you know that soon they will be celebrating your life in this very building. And grateful people, they'll remember you and they'll be inspired by your generosity. Now, this is the season of gratitude. And Reverend Cain's message was about appreciative inquiry. And I'm really thankful to be a part of this amazing community. And, each time I come, I'm just amazed that I'm included among people that not only have a great respect for, but they're thinking people and caring people who really genuinely want to make the world a better place. I really am so proud to call myself a member here. And I know that there's no shortage of worthy causes, especially now in this area as we've been hit with another recession. But I think and believe that a contribution you make now to our congregation's long-term financial stability is that contribution gets magnified through the ages like a ripple in time, so that every dollar that you spend now to help us buy down our debt is $3 later that we can put into the community and put into good works. So now here's my final plate. And you want, as my wife does, for this to be our final plate. And just like NPR, you want it to stop? So we have 38 pledges so far. We count that there's probably 32 more out there. And first of all, I want to thank the 38 pledges who've come through for contributing and for your generosity. Yes, thank you all. Now, for the 32 that are still out there, we need those cards. Now, one of the things my wife is also fond of telling me, she says, don't go looking in other people's pocketbooks. So I can't tell you or make any recommendations as to what you should give. But I do ask that you look at Capital Campaign 3 as a long-term gift, one that will literally last for decades. I do ask that you search for the most that you can afford over the next 3 years. And I do ask that what does belonging to this community mean to you on a mind, body, and soul level? And compare that to the other expenses in your life. I do ask that you heed Viktor Frankl's advice and live your life now as though you were looking back on it from a future time. And ask yourself, what did you spend your money on that gave your life meaning? It's the sacrifices and the times we push ourselves that really, truly mean the most. So, push yourself. Fill out and return your pledge card and give to something of lasting value that not only supports you now, but will support generations to follow. And as a thank you gift, we're going to throw in a cup of coffee. And in conclusion, I just want to say, don't make me come up here again and ask.
Our closing song is